This is Luke Paulson, the Catholic Conservative, and welcome to the news of the week for September 13th, 2025. And if you enjoy these videos, do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. Charlie Kirk, the legend. Charlie Kirk was killed by an enemy. There are no two ways about it. Now we know for a fact that it was a leftist. We keep hearing from Democrats that Republicans are dangerous and will commit or threaten violence at the drop of a hat. However, one fact, and one fact alone, is crystal clear. Liberals do more of the threatening. A Democrat usually only has an attempt on his life if he strays too close to President Donald Trump, whereas a Republican has an attempt on his life if he stays too close to President Trump. I ran the numbers myself and even got ChatGPT to admit the pattern. There are even leftists who are praying for the Bullet's family and cheering this man's death. If any Republican did that, the fake news would have a field day. And something tells me that the fake news will also go out of their way to find something else to talk about. Maybe they will keep covering the foul ball at the Phillies game instead. Moving on. This has me thinking about legacy. People are saying that we need to take up the legacy of Charlie Kirk and keep the fight going. One thing that he loved to do was to bring the truth to people's faces and show them their logical inconsistencies directly. In that same vein, I would like to show you a comedian who is doing just that. And as long as we keep mocking liberal absurdities with human decency, I think that we are honoring Charlie Kirk's legacy. Make Whiteface funny again. I, for the life of me, cannot imagine why someone would do blackface. There have been a lot of bad calls, like the kid who wore war paint to a football game, but this is about the bigger issue at hand. Comedian Andrew DeBoer, better known as Drewski, wore whiteface in a skit. The makeup and cosmetics for the skit, satirizing NASCAR fans, was so on point that his own mother would not recognize him. I have seen a lot of people call the portrayal racist, but it was not. At best, it was stereotypical. However, Drewski is not the first person to don whiteface. I want to live in a world where we can mock everyone to their faces. Only by laughing with one another are we going to come together politically. However, we must not forget that the more oppressor labels you get, the more things that you cannot criticize. At least according to the snowflakes. Speaking of mockery, mock Trump and get arrested. To be clear, it is not the mocking of Trump that got David Brown arrested. It was his criminal and elitist mindset. Mr. Brown has been arrested for committing $12 million in fraud, amongst other lesser charges. What does this have to do with Donald Trump, you might ask? Brown was the producer of the film The Apprentice, which mocked him a little while back. Now, if President Trump were the dictator that liberals say that he is, Mr. Brown would have been arrested before the movie even got to theaters. The fact that he could produce this movie and that anyone could buy it is proof that President Trump respects the rule of law. The same is true for all of the protests against him. A dictator would not let himself be sued, but instead would just send soldiers to take out the plaintiffs and their lawyers. Now, this is just the latest in a long line of people who get in legal trouble for the very things that they accuse Donald Trump of. Whether it was Hillary Clinton who colluded with the Russians, or Letitia James who engaged in mortgage fraud. I have not watched the movie, nor do I plan to, but something tells me that Mr. Brown probably accused Donald Trump of fraud. Now, he is being convicted of fraud.
Ironic.
Mr. Brown potentially faces 20 years for each fraud count. Combined with the other charges, he could be in jail for 300 years. Which means, if he was just now getting out, he could tell us about a concert performance by Bach, or tell us about the Treaty of Vienna. Speaking of treaties, let us go on to America's newest federal department, the Department of War. This government department was created in 1789 but was dissolved in 1947. For nearly 80 years, it was known as the Department of Defense. Now President Trump has brought the original name back, the Department of War. While it does sound a little neocon, it is actually much more accurate. The modern military-industrial complex is more about fighting wars that further America's financial interests rather than defense. This also shows how seriously President Trump treats military action. One thing that has been mentioned is that this now puts the National Guard under the Department of War, something that President Trump has already made abundantly clear. I have mentioned before that the president does not have the authority to send in the National Guard without the support of the governor and/or mayor, and Mayor Brandon Johnson signed an executive order forbidding police from working with the National Guard. However, the same Democrats who do not want the National Guard in Chicago have no qualms about President Eisenhower superseding Governor Faubus in Arkansas. The famed Little Rock Nine were protected during integration by the 101st Airborne Division. The governor opposed what the president did, but today's liberals applaud President Eisenhower. Like President Trump, he did not have to worry about a second term. Now, if President Trump does send in the National Guard to Chicago or Los Angeles, we need to think not only of short-term consequences, but recall that he will, once again, be vindicated long-term. Maybe the National Guard needs to be sent to North Carolina. After all, there are some unstable people there. Trains are not safe. Just like with Charlie Kirk, I will not be showing the clip of the attack. Feel free to find it on your own, but I would advise against it. I also will not be sharing the name of the attacker, as this will give him the fame that he does not deserve. A Ukrainian refugee was on a train in Charlotte when she was killed by the person behind her. This killer had been arrested on violent crimes at least 14 times and released after each one. The district attorney of this county is Spencer B. Merriweather III. At first I thought that he might have been put in by George Soros, but from what I have found, this cannot be proven. In 2016, North Carolina was a relatively red state and President Trump just barely won by about 4%. However, in Mecklenburg County where this murder took place, he lost by 30%. It seems like this area would have been safe enough for Soros not to bother. Also, DA Merriweather has served since 2017, and so he may have been there before Soros started intervening. All this is to say that the present situation is getting worse and worse every day. The problem is largely perpetuated by a certain demographic, but the root problem is that law enforcement is having its funding cut. Then the district attorneys and judges are getting violent criminals out of consequences. Another innocent life was lost because of the liberal pathogen. But the same Democrats do not care. And here I thought that we were supposed to stand by the Ukrainians under all circumstances. Meanwhile, President Trump has a reputation of being tough on crime, and something tells me that if it was up to him, this killer would already be on his way to hell. However, some crimes may never be prosecuted. Why remove the names? The Deputy Chief of the Department of Justice, Joseph Schnitt, was caught on hidden camera by James O'Keefe's team. He claimed that every Republican name would be scrubbed from the Epstein records. Officially, he was parroting what he heard in the media, but that is a common argument from the people that Mr. O'Keefe's team catches. It would be hypocritical of me to believe everything that is captured on their hidden cameras, except for this one video. I think that President Trump is hoping to fall on his sword with this one. Moving on, this whole thing is the major problem of tribalism. George Washington warned us about making political parties, but we did not listen. However, the creation of parties was inevitable. Be that as it may, the victims, as of this writing, plan to release a private list. This can be read on the floor of the House of Representatives or the Senate. And unlike the victims who can be sued for defamation, while speaking on the floor, a legislator cannot be sued. Yes, that is technically something that they can do. Article 1, Section 6 of the Constitution states, "They shall in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace be privileged from the arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place." Basically, they cannot be sued for giving the names of the criminals who exploited these women while on the floor of the Senate. While we are on the topic of the Senate floor, let us talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Standing up to Warren, I would like to point out that the same people who believe that RFK does not trust the science, forced an experimental drug onto America, no questions asked, believe that men can become women just by believing in themselves and changing clothes, and that an 8-year-old has the mental maturity to decide that healthy organs need to be removed. Now, if you think that all three of those positions are based in empirical science,
I got some oceanfront property in Arizona. From my front porch you can see the sea.
the fake Indian Elizabeth Warren received over $5 million from this corrupt industry. Why is this industry pumping so much money into these Democrat campaigns? Could it be that they do not want to risk being sued?
Yes.
Could it be that they do not want anyone looking into certain things?
Yes.
Something tells me that all of the Democrats who wore 2 or 3 masks while not blaming China all got massive donations to their campaigns by the medical industrial complex. And as the saying goes, you do not bite the hand that feeds you. Democrats love to talk about controlling political donations as this is supposedly not free speech. However, something tells me that they will be silent here. Either way, let us talk about another natural right of Americans. Banning guns for the transgenders. We hear a lot of talk from gun grabbers that we need checks on the Second Amendment. ignorant, of course, of the fact that criminals do not obey laws. Furthermore, the perpetrator of this latest shooting got all of his guns legally. One argument is that the mentally ill or impaired do not need guns. Up until relatively recently, gender dysphoria was considered and treated as a mental illness. Now President Trump is supposedly planning a ban on transgenders getting guns. And just like that, we will see how many liberals come out opposing gun bans. Either way, the NRA has publicly denounced the plan. If rights can be taken away from one person for an unjust reason, they can be taken away from anyone for an unjust reason. I really hope that President Trump is just baiting these people. This is a huge slippery slope. No one is going to deny that a lot of people die from people using guns, but more people are killed by Planned Parenthood and their allies than all school shooters put together. As such, states like Texas are trying to dismantle Planned Parenthood. Keep poisons out of Texas. Surgical abortions account for a tiny fraction of the overall number of infanticides committed by Planned Parenthood and their ilk. The vast majority are actually chemical infanticides. Even though most, if not all of these infanticides are illegal in Texas, women still try to kill their children with the pill. As such, the Texas legislature had to pass a law banning these pills from entering Texas. No longer will these mothers be able to order poison via mail to kill their children. I cannot even imagine what sort of sick person would want to use such a pill. Liberals and their allies seem to want to control the population of the world. Well, some of them have outright stated that it is their goal, but I digress. If these people cannot kill children in the womb, they will work to destroy their souls. One thing that they did to this end was to try and make voluntary prayers illegal. That is right. Voluntary prayers, not mandatory. However, President Trump is hard at work. Private prayers in public schools. I very much hate the term public school. There is very little public about them since the unions control everything, and many things on their agenda are not in the public interest. The First Amendment forbids not only the establishment of a state religion, it also forbids the government from keeping people from worshiping. That second part is even more important. Not that the people who shut down churches over the uncommon cold know that. Moving on, President Trump has signed an executive order that protects prayer in government schools. If a student wants to join a coach in prayer, let him. Neither the coach nor the student is infringing on the life, liberty, or property of anyone else. The Department of Education, as with the transgender nonsense, may even have teeth to go after religious persecution. Just as they can cut funding for schools that bring in transgender nonsense, the Department of Education may be able to do the same thing if a school violates religious liberty. The purpose of government is to protect the rights that we already have. Now, ever so fittingly, the party that rejects the Almighty is the same party that has no qualms about lying to us about statistics, exposing the job numbers, firing the head statistician at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, was one of the best moves that President Trump has made in a while. It has been said that there are lies, darn lies, and statistics. And as someone who occasionally has to crunch numbers, I assure you that you can make the numbers say virtually anything that you want, if you put the right variables in. It is the same reason that these climate change models are always so catastrophic, despite being consistently wrong. It all comes down to the numbers that are put in and the human bias. From what I understand, the job numbers that the Biden administration was touting, where the employment numbers and people with jobs rose, was largely a result of the illegals being counted. As such, we see another reason why Democrats wanted these people to, quote, surge to the border, close quotes. They were to come here so that the government could cook the books. Thus, the very strange thumbnail on this video. Without these variables, the numbers look terrible for the previous administration. It is going to take a lot of work to get things back to anything resembling normal, because when the enemy is willing to kill people just for free speech, normal is not coming back. Ever. Maybe I'm just blowing smoke. Maybe I'm completely off my rocker, but that is just my opinion. And do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. But before you go, on the left I have last week's video, but you may also enjoy the video on the right.